You wake to the sound of wind howling through the slats in the wall, a drawn-out moan that slips into your cabin like a ghost left the door open. It's not even dawn yet, though a pale thread of light is starting to bleed across the horizon. You open your eyes to find yourself in a world that feels both unfamiliar and deeply uncomfortable. And not just because of the aching in your back. It takes a moment to place where you are, until the frigid air bites at your nose, and the smell of stale sweat smoke and old leather confirms it. You're not in your own bed. You're in the American Wild West. And it's 1873. And since you're already here, wrapped in buffalo hide blinking at the frost on your eyelashes, this might be a good time to gently invite you to leave a little trail behind. If these sleepy walks through history help you wind down at the end of your day, a quick like or even a quiet subscribe helps more than you'd think. It keeps these stories traveling across time zones into the ears of other night owls. And if you feel like sharing, drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. It's always a comfort seeing this odd little campfire we've built together, flickering softly around the world. You slept the night curled atop a straw mattress, though mattress might be too generous. More like a lumpy sack stuffed with grass reeds, and what you're desperately hoping are just bugs. The fabric is rough, scratchy, and seems to have absorbed every odor known to humankind, and several not yet classified. Your shoulders and hips ache from the unevenness. There's no pillow. You rolled up your only coat and used that, though you're now regretting the choice, since your breath has begun to mist visibly in the air and your fingers have gone stiff. The ceiling above you is made of uneven boards and reeds. The occasional shaft of cold slips through the gaps. A spider the size of your thumb scurries across a beam overhead, but you don't have the energy to care. It's too cold too early, and you're still clinging to the last threads of whatever dream transported you here. You sit up slowly. The blanket falls from your shoulders in a dusty heap, releasing a small puff of particles into the air. Dust smoke residue pollen. You don't ask. The floor greets your bare feet with a damp, unwelcoming chill. It's not made of planks, but packed earth uneven and cracked from years of use. In one corner, you see where someone attempted to sweep perhaps with a bundle of reeds tied together, but gave up halfway. There's a low table nearby, uneven and warped from moisture. A chipped mug sits atop it, a chunk of something dark and stiff floating in the bottom. A spoon leans against it, bent, as if it had once been used as a lever, or perhaps a weapon. The silence is heavy, broken only by the low creak of timber in the wind, and now and then a distant animal cry. Maybe a dog, maybe a coyote. You're not in a bustling town, or even a sleepy village. This is a cabin somewhere along the frontier, and civilization is a good 20 miles in any direction. The air smells of old wood smoke animal hair, and something sour that clings to the walls. It's the kind of odor that never fully dissipates. You can't quite tell if it's coming from outside or from you. You scratch absently at your forearm and find a small welt. Another gift from the mattress, perhaps. And then the realization hits. You're expected to survive the day here. Not observe, not analyze, not reenact for fun. Survive. You glance toward the door. It's a rough plank of wood set into a frame that's clearly seen better years. A draft slides under it like a warning. You see your breath fog again. You wrap yourself in your blanket stand slowly and feel a few joints protest. Oddly satisfying, oddly discouraging. There's no running water, no electricity, no plumbing. Your options for morning hygiene are limited to the tin wash basin in the corner filled halfway with gray water. A crust of ice floats along the top. You prod it with your finger, it cracks like thin glass. No toothbrush, no toothpaste. You might have a rag. Some ash. If you're lucky, a pinch of salt. Mainstream historical fact. On the 19th century frontier, especially in rural settlements, most homes lacked any form of plumbing or sanitation. Water had to be carried by hand from wells or streams and was used sparingly, often reserved first for cooking and drinking. Bathing was rare monthly or seasonal depending on the weather and availability of water. Many families shared the same wash water in sequence. Quirky detail. In winter, settlers sometimes stuffed their boots with dried grass newspaper or even corn husks to retain heat. Some even padded the soles with sheep's wool or rabbit fur, then wore them indoors like makeshift slippers. A few left them on at night, reasoning that cold feet were the first step toward pneumonia, and pneumonia was far more dangerous than smelling a little funky. As you prepare to step outside, you check your attire, or rather, your single outfit. A coarse linen shirt patched and fraying at the cuffs hangs on a peg near the door. It smells faintly of sweat and smoke. Your pants are canvas thick and stiff with patches sewn on in two different kinds of thread. You slide into them, with effort, the cold fabric reluctant to yield. There's only one pair of boots. The left one has a hole in the sole, the right one, a broken lace. You shove your feet into them, hoping the dried straw inside will cushion the cold. You wrap a frayed wool scarf around your neck, then pull on the coat, the one that had moonlighted, as your pillow. Its wool-lined leather cracked and faded. Heavy. Smells like grease and old rain. You step outside, into the frozen hush. The world is gray-blue and silent. The trees, skeletal and shivering, sway against a cloudy sky. Your breath plumes outward in little clouds that disappear almost instantly. There's snow, not deep, but crusted hard over the earth, like icing on stale bread. Everything feels distant. Far away, not just in space, but in time. It's easy to forget how utterly isolating life on the frontier could be. If you needed help, a neighbor might be 2 or 3 miles away. That could mean hours of walking, or longer in snow, or mud. There were no phones, no telegraph lines here, not unless you were near a rail stop or a telegraph relay station, which you're not. If something went wrong, it stayed wrong until someone happened by. You see the barn, a low slumped shape across the yard. The roof leans held up by willpower and a prayer. Smoke curls lazily from the chimney, a faint promise of warmth inside. You're supposed to feed the chickens this morning. Maybe check on the goat. The chickens hate you, but at least they're warm in their coop. You trudge through the icy dirt path, snow crunching underfoot. The wind slices across your face. Your nose runs. Your ears burn, then go numb. This isn't the Wild West of storybooks and sepia-toned postcards. It isn't saloons and silver spurs and bravado. It's cold, it's dull, it's hard, it's dirty, and the sun's not even fully up yet. You reach the chicken coop, lift the latch with fingers already stinging, and get pecked on the wrist by a hen that looks like she's been waiting all night for a fight. You mutter something you'd never say in polite company, even though no one's listening. The feed is frozen solid in its sack. You kick it loose, scatter a few handfuls into the trough, and step back as the chickens descend like tiny feathered demons. Your hands are now red shaking and covered in grain dust. Breakfast can wait. You glance around. The world is waking. A few birds chirp tentatively in the distance. Smoke thickens from the chimney. You think about coffee, but remember the tin on the table burnt bitter and barely drinkable. Still, it's hot. And today, that might be enough. You make your way back inside, peeling off layers as you go. You hang your scarf by the fire. You press your hands close to the embers. The warmth is faint but real. You've survived your first hour in the Wild West, but just barely. By the time the sun has hauled itself over the edge of the prairie sky, casting a pale gold sheen across the frostbitten earth, you're already on your second splinter and third near slip on the icy ground. Your boots, still packed with straw from yesterday, squelch slightly with each step, soaked from the frozen mud that thawed just enough to betray you. Your hands are red, your shoulders tight, and your stomach issuing soft complaints like a dissatisfied guest at a subpar inn. But there's no time to linger. The frontier doesn't pause for aching muscles or a longing sigh. Your day's labor begins now, and it will not end soon. The fire inside your cabin has burned low. You stir the ashes with a stick and add a few splinters of wood from the pile carefully hoarded slightly damp. You crouch close, coaxing a flame with shallow breaths. There's a moment where it seems it won't catch. And then a small tongue of fire licks up hungry and cautious. You feed it slowly, the way you might offer food to a frightened animal. Once there's a proper flame, you boil water if you have any left. There's no plumbing, so water means hauling it from the nearest well, which could be half a mile away. You carry it in metal buckets that freeze your hands even through gloves, assuming you have gloves. Most people didn't. A pair of wool socks might be repurposed instead, or layers of linen strips tied at the wrist. Outside, the chores are stacking up like cordwood. The chickens have been fed, but they'll need their nesting boxes cleaned. That means scraping out soiled straw and replacing it with dry, which you fetch from the barn where mice scurry in the corners, and a faint ammonia tang hangs in the air. Your goat bleats impatiently. She needs milking. You crouch beside her, your forehead bumping the wooden slats of her pen, and begin the slow rhythmic process. The milk is warm, your fingers are not. She kicks at your shin, once reminding you that domestic animals are only semi-domesticated out here. Once that's done, you haul water. You brace your back, lift the buckets, and make the long trudge to the cabin. One spills slightly soaking your leg. The other threatens to swing into your knee. You try not to curse. The wind would only carry it off anyway. Then you chop wood. The pile has shrunk alarmingly over the past week, and though it's barely midday, you know it won't last another 2 nights. You pick up the axe, its handle smooth from countless hands, its blade chipped and slightly loose in the socket. You swing. The log doesn't split. You swing again. A crack. By the 3rd hit, your arms are burning your back already, reminding you that you are not a practiced frontiersman, but a time traveler with very poor luck. This is not glamorous work. It's repetitive, rough, and unrelenting. You sweat through your shirt despite the cold, and when you pause, the sweat freezes at your collarbone. Mainstream historical fact. On the 19th century American frontier, physical labor dominated every waking hour. Men, women, and even children were expected to contribute from sunrise to sunset. Tasks included chopping wood, hauling water, planting crops, tending animals, preserving food, and repairing tools or structures. There was no concept of the modern weekend, and very little time for rest. For most settlers, especially in rural areas, daily survival was a full-time job. Quirky detail. Some families marked particularly backbreaking days with notches on the barn wall, not as celebration, but as quiet warnings to the future. Don't build your fence in thawing ground. 1 rid. Another simply said July 3rd, never again. One farmer in Nebraska reportedly carved tiny stick figures into his outhouse wall arms, raised in despair to cope with the endless chores and isolation. By late morning, you're repairing a fence that collapsed under last night's wind. The posts are old, the wire rusty, and your tools inadequate. You dig out the post hole with a bent spade, jam the beam in place, and brace it with stones. Your breath huffs in short bursts, your hands raw even through mittens. You cut yourself on a nail. The blood beads bright red, then goes numb. You shrug. You've run out of concern. A neighbor might stop by later. If they do, they'll expect coffee, a seat by the fire, and maybe some help with their own chores. That's the social contract of the frontier, isolated, yes, but interdependent. You give help where you can, and in return, you hope someone shows up the day your roof caves in or your barn floods. Lunch is cold beans and a bit of stale bread chewed slowly as you sit on an overturned bucket, the sun warming your cheeks for a precious few minutes. A crow watches from a tree. You chew. It stares. You wonder if it's considering eating you, should you fall face first into the snow. You stand again, knees creaking like old barn doors, and head toward the backfield. There's a dead tree that needs removing. You'll need the wood, and if it falls in the wrong direction, it could crush your cabin. You spend the next hour sawing at the trunk, your arms burning the saw, slipping with each stroke. When it finally gives, it doesn't fall straight, but leans catching on another tree and lodging there like a drunk refusing to sit down. You mutter a few quiet curses and kick snow at it. It's nearly noon now, and you're already exhausted. The rhythm of life out here is simple, but merciless. You do what must be done when it must be done, however tired, sore, or miserable you feel. Tools break, weather shifts, animals get loose. The unexpected is daily, and planning is a luxury reserved for people with options. And still, you work. Because if you don't, there's no one to pick up the slack. It's easy to romanticize the frontier, the freedom, the fresh air, the sense of self-reliance. And yes, there's pride in making your own way. But there's also the crushing weight of knowing that every choice is yours to make and yours to pay for. Historians still debate whether the ideal of rugged individualism on the American frontier was more myth than reality. Some argue that settlers were far more reliant on each other than popular culture admits, especially women and children, who often formed intricate networks of support across isolated homesteads. Others point to diaries and letters describing deep loneliness, mental strain, and emotional breakdowns, suggesting the burden of independence was often too much to bear alone. You pause to stretch your back aching and look out over the field. The snow sparkles slightly in the sun. There's a kind of beauty in it, harsh though it may be. You imagine what this place might look like in spring green shoots pushing through the dirt wildflowers, nodding in the breeze. It's hard to picture from here, but not impossible. There's a kind of defiance in every person who lived here, a stubbornness, a belief that things would get better if they just kept going. You take a deep breath. You pick up the axe again. The goats are waiting. The barn roof needs patching. You need to cut more wood for the evening fire. And you've still got half the day ahead of you. You shuffle back toward the cabin as the sun creeps higher into the pale winter sky, its warmth more suggestion than reality. The snow crunches dry beneath your boots, and every footstep sends a shiver up your calves where your damp socks cling. Your hands are stiff, and the axe weighs heavier than it did an hour ago. You try to swing it up to the hook near the door, but miss slightly, your arm not quite obeying, and it clatters to the floor with a thud. No one sees, but you wince all the same. Inside, the fire is low again. You bend to stoke it. The smoke curls lazily, searching for an escape. There's a crack between two beams near the ceiling where you can feel it seeping out no chimney. Here just luck and careful fire tending. Still, it's warmer than outside. Barely. And now, breakfast. Or what passes for it in this place and time. You stare at the shelf with mild dread. No refrigerator, no pantry, no shiny glass jars filled with overnight oats and chia seeds. Instead, a wooden bin of dried beans, a hunk of salt pork wrapped in cloth, and a battered tin canister labeled coffee in faded pencil. The label is a lie. You know it. It knows it. Still, you reach for it. The beans are hard, dark, and stubborn. You scoop a handful and pour them into the dented pot already waiting near the hearth. You add water from the bucket cold heavy and place it over the flame, listening to the soft hiss as it begins to warm. It's not much, but it's something. You reach for the salt pork next. The knife struggles through it, tough as leather, striped with thick fat and a layer of something white that could be salt or memory. You slice a piece and toss it into another pan. It sizzles, the only exciting sound in the cabin so far today. Then, the beans. You soak them overnight in a cracked clay bowl, and now they resemble something vaguely edible. You dump them in, add a pinch of pepper if you're lucky enough to have any, and let them bubble with a low watery plop. A few minutes later, you're sitting at the table, really more of a crate with your metal cup and a tin plate. The coffee steams faintly, the smell oddly sweet and bitter all at once. You take a sip. It's not terrible, you tell yourself, but that's mostly because you've forgotten what good means. Mainstream historical fact. On the American frontier in the mid to late 1800s, the standard breakfast for many settlers consisted of simple durable staples, beans, cornbread, or biscuits when flour was available, and salt-cured pork. Coffee, a beloved comfort, was often in short supply, especially in remote areas, or during harsh winters. In those cases, settlers used roasted substitutes such as acorns, chicory, or parched grains like rye and barley. These brews offered caffeine-free warmth, though not much else. You take another bite of beans. They're warm. That's their best feature. The pork is salty, so salty your tongue curls slightly, but it's protein. And that counts for something. The coffee, well, it's hot. The silence presses in again. You chew slowly, watching the flickering light from the fire dance on the wall. You start to think maybe you could get used to this. The quiet, the slowness. The A-sharp knock at the door snaps you out of it. You freeze. Visitors are rare. And visitors unannounced, especially this early, tend to fall into one of three categories: neighbor needing help traveling, preacher needing shelter, or stranger needing trouble. You approach cautiously hand-resting, near the rusted rifle leaning by the doorway. You open the door slowly. It's Tom, the neighbor from 2 homesteads, over Meaning about 4 miles east. He looks exhausted, eyes, red nose running from the cold. He's wearing a mismatched coat, one sleeve held together with what looks like horsehair stitching. "Morning," he says. "Got a sow missing. Thought maybe she wandered west." You nod even though you haven't seen her. "Come in, get warm." He steps inside, stomping the snow from his boots. You offer him what's left of the coffee and a bit of pork, and he accepts both with a grunt that could mean thanks or simply, "I'm still alive." This is frontier hospitality. No frills, no speeches, just hot food and a place to sit. You chat a little, as much as 2 sleep-deprived, frostbitten people can. He mentions his fence falling, his wife coughing, the creek freezing over again. You nod sympathetically. None of it is surprising. After a while, he rises, muttering thanks, and heads back into the cold. You watch him disappear into the tree line, his shoulders hunched and determined. You sit again, suddenly more tired than you were earlier. A warmth creeps through you, not just from the fire, but from the interaction. Even brief connections matter out here. Maybe especially out here. You rinse your plate in cold water, scrubbing it with sand and a bit of dry grass. Soap is expensive, and you save it for laundry or guests. The coffee cup gets a rinse too, though the ring of residue will likely survive another century. As you work, you catch yourself humming. Just a few notes. A tune with no words. Something old and drifting like the wind outside. Quirky detail. On the frontier, settlers often reuse coffee grounds multiple times, brewing weaker and weaker batches, until the liquid resembled something between tea and muddy memory. One traveler reported that his host's coffee couldn't raise a man from sleep, but might convince a corpse to stay down. Breakfast ends not with satisfaction, but with readiness. You're fueled for the day, not full, not content, but equipped. The work ahead is heavy, and the calories are few, but this is the way of things. As you bank the fire and reach for your gloves, you think again about how different this all feels. Not just the chores or the meals, but the sheer intensity of doing everything yourself. Of not having a buffer between you and consequence. There's no takeout here, no delivery, no corner store. If you don't feed yourself, you don't eat. If you don't haul wood, you freeze. If you don't mend that broken boot, you limp. And if you don't watch your step, well, the prairie is littered with the bones of those who forgot that part. You open the door again. The sun is higher now, though no warmer. The wind has picked up slightly, carrying with it a dry whisper that seems to say, "Keep moving." You step outside your shadow, long and sharp on the snow. You've had your breakfast. Now it's time to earn your lunch. By now, the sun has climbed halfway toward its chilly zenith, suspended like a ghostly coin in the pale prairie sky. Its light is bright, but has all the warmth of an old photograph, casting long, blue-edged shadows across the landscape. You pull your coat tighter around you, though the cold has already taken up residence beneath your layers like an unwanted lodger. There's no more time to dawdle. The serious work of the day begins now, and out here, that's not a metaphor. It's just survival. You head toward the tool shed, which is really more of a lean-to cobbled from mismatched planks, its roof sagging slightly under the weight of frost and time. The door groans on its rusted hinges as you swing it open. Inside, the familiar scent of oiled wood and old sweat greets you. An axe, a hoe, a spade, and a stack of tools that haven't been sharpened in weeks, maybe months, stand waiting like tired soldiers. Your first task is to check the well. The rope creaks as you lower the bucket, and you listen carefully for the soft splash below. If you're lucky, it hasn't frozen solid. The water is cold, brackish, and smells faintly of iron, but it's still liquid. A small win. You pull it up arms, straining with the effort. Your shoulder twinges as you lift, but you ignore it because you have to. That's the rule of frontier life. If you're able to move, you work. Next comes the fence. Overnight, one of the corner posts fell again. The wind here has a habit of making its own decisions. You drag over a replacement post rough-hewn from a nearby tree and still sappy in spots. The ground is frozen solid, so you have to break through with a digging bar. Each hit reverberates up your arms. Each strike chips away at the soil and your energy. After 45 minutes of laborious work, the post finally sits in place, leaning just enough to irritate you, but not enough to redo. You loop rusted wire around it using stones and your boot heel to wedge it into a semblance of structure. It'll hold for now. Mainstream historical fact frontier. Homesteaders typically spent their mornings in relentless physical labor, hauling water, chopping wood, mending fences, tending livestock, and maintaining the home. Many settlers lacked access to blacksmiths or general stores, meaning tools were repaired or improvised by hand. Fencing was critical for keeping livestock in, and predators out, especially in regions where open grazing was common. Each family member, regardless of age or gender, was expected to contribute. Quirky detail. Some frontier women kept an emergency birthing kit in the same box as their sewing supplies. Why? Because in many homesteads, the woman of the house might be called upon to deliver a baby sometimes, her own using nothing more than thread scissors and nerves of steel. It wasn't unusual for neighbors to knock mid-morning asking for help with a birth, a tooth extraction, or the sudden need to amputate a toe. And yes, these tasks were often done without formal training or anesthesia. You shift next to the livestock pen, where your lone cow eyes you with a mix of expectation and passive contempt. She needs hay, which means hauling a bale from the barn. It's heavy. Heavier than you remember. Maybe you're just tired. Maybe the cold is tricking your muscles into thinking they've aged 20 years since dawn. You drag it along the frozen ground, scattering bits of straw as you go. You toss it over the gate, and the cow begins to chew, indifferent to your efforts. You sigh. You don't take it personally. Then comes the woodpile. You were clever enough, sort of, to split some logs yesterday, but it won't last. The pile is too small, the air too cold. You pick up the axe, which now feels like an extension of your arm, and begin the rhythmic backbreaking work of splitting more. Each swing bites into the wood with a dull thunk. Sometimes it sticks, and you have to pry the blade free with your boot. Sometimes it shatters cleanly, and you get a small surge of satisfaction. Either way, the motion is relentless. Swing, crack, lift, repeat. By the time the sun is brushing the tops of the trees, you've chopped enough to last through the night, maybe. You stagger inside for a brief pause. Your breath clouds in the air. The fire has dimmed again. You feed it a few logs, watching them catch with slow orange fingers. You don't sit down. You know better. If you sit now, you might not get back up. Instead, you grab a rag, a tin of lard, and head for the hinges on the back door that have been squealing like wounded animals every time the wind shifts. You grease them quickly, silently congratulating yourself on this tiny act of maintenance. The wind still whistles through the cracks, but at least the door no longer cries about it. You notice the roof is leaking again just a little, a drop now and then falling into the bucket below with a soft plink. You meant to patch it last week, but then the goat got out, and then the storm hit, and then the fence fell. There's always something. You step outside again just as a hawk screeches overhead. You squint upward, watching it circle. The sun is high now, but its rays feel thin and distant. You roll your shoulder. There's a growing ache there, a throb that suggests you'll be nursing it tonight. It's just past noon. You've already hauled water, mended a fence, fed the animals chopped wood, cooked breakfast, repaired tools, ignored 3 new blisters. And now you get to fix the chicken coop door, because, of course you do. You head toward the coop where a few hens are still scratching around in the straw. One squawks indignantly as you approach. The door is hanging from one hinge, swinging in the breeze like a lazy drunk. You realign it hammer in a few nails crookedly, but they hold and test the latch. It catches, barely. You shrug. It's enough. Historians still debate the extent to which frontier women were expected to participate in traditionally male labor. While romanticized versions often depict strict divisions of labor, diary entries, and local records show women plowing fields, tending livestock, constructing outbuildings, and even hunting when necessary. Survival often outweighed social norms. You return to the cabin hand's filthy nose running and realize you forgot to eat lunch. Your stomach reminds you with a quiet growl. You grab the cold remains of breakfast, a spoonful of beans, a hunk of bread hardened at the edges, and chew mechanically. It's food. That's all that matters. You glance at the sky again. It's bluer now, streaked with high clouds. The kind that look pretty but don't promise warmth. You take a long breath, letting the cold settle in your lungs like snow in a barrel. Then you exhale slowly, watching it swirl and vanish. You're tired. Already. And the day is only half over. But the fence is standing. The animals are fed. The fire is burning. The roof only leaks a little. And out here, that's what success looks like. You don't mean to glance toward town, but your eyes find the horizon line anyway, the faint shimmer of dust and rooftops barely visible between the thin winter trees. It's not far technically, 4, maybe 5 miles, but on foot through icy ground and unpredictable weather, it feels like another state entirely. Still, there are things you need. You're almost out of flour. The lard is low. And that broken shovel handle won't repair itself no matter how many times you squint at it meaningfully. So you bundle up again. Your scarf smells faintly of smoke and old cabbage. Your coat still damp from the morning creaks slightly as it stiffens in the cold. The boots full of fresh straw crunch over the icy soil as you walk. The wind tugs at your sleeves and presses its frozen lips against your cheeks like a scorned lover. You begin the walk toward town. There's no real path, just a suggestion of one-flattened grasses and muddy ruts frozen now in sculptural ridges that catch your toes every few steps. The sun glints off patches of ice, making everything look deceptively beautiful. Your breath fogs steadily in front of you, each exhale marking progress in this quiet, bitter landscape. The town begins to take shape slowly, a handful of buildings, most single-story, their facades weathered and gray. There's a general store, of course, and a saloon. A few private homes with crooked fences. A church whose bell hasn't rung in weeks, maybe months. And near the center, a worn hitching post with 3 horses tied lazily heads down against the wind. You approach slowly, cautious, in a way that feels instinctive. Even if you don't know exactly why your shoulders tense, your steps slow. Because this isn't just a town. It's a threat. It's easy to forget that civilization in the 19th century American West wasn't always civil. Towns sprang up quickly around railroads, mines, or trail junctions filled with people looking to escape something poverty, the law their own past. That meant rapid growth, little oversight, and plenty of tension. Guns, alcohol, boredom, and desperation made for a potent mix. You step onto the main street. It's not paved, just packed dirt turned icy by the season. A wagon rolls past its wheels squealing. The driver nods at you. You nod back. No one smiles. You glance up and down the storefronts. Most windows are darkened by soot or smoke-streaked glass. A few people stand in doorways or lean against posts. No one seems in a hurry. You step inside the general store. Immediately, you're hit with the scent of dry wood flour, kerosene, and old rope. Shelves line the walls, stacked with canned goods, tools, sacks of grain. A narrow potbelly stove glows faintly in the center, offering a pool of warmth. You edge toward it, nodding at the shopkeeper. He nods back, but says nothing. You select a few essentials: flour, salt, another tin of something questionably labeled beef stew. You ask about shovel handles. He gestures vaguely toward the back. You find one that fits barely and bring it up to the counter. He tallies slowly, scratching numbers on a worn notepad. You pull out your coins. It's more than you expected. Always is. You don't argue. That's not how things work here. You pay. You thank him. You step back outside, and the cold hits you like a reminder. You start the walk back. But you don't get far. A shout from across the street stops you. It's not loud, but it's sharp. You turn. A man is standing outside the saloon. He's not looking at you. He's looking at someone else. Another man, younger, staggering slightly. They're not smiling either. You pause. Everyone pauses. Conversations trail off. Even the horses seem to tense. The younger man reaches for his coat. You don't stick around to see what happens next. You move quickly down the road, not running, but purposeful. You know enough to avoid getting caught in someone else's bad afternoon. Gunfights are rare here. Real ones, but not non-existent. Most violence happens in shadows and alleys behind closed doors. But sometimes, it spills into the street. And when it does, it's swift and loud. Mainstream historical fact. Contrary to popular belief, shootouts in Old West towns were rare, and quick-draw duels were more Hollywood myth than historical fact. Most acts of violence were ambushes or heated outbursts fueled by alcohol and personal disputes. Towns like Dodge City, Kansas, and Tombstone, Arizona, implemented firearm ordinances that required visitors to surrender their weapons upon entering city limits. Still, law enforcement was sparse, and sheriffs or marshals often had limited authority and even fewer resources. You pass the sheriff's office. The door is closed. A wanted poster flaps loosely in the wind, the ink faded and smudged. The man in the drawing has a mustache and squinting eyes. So does half the town. You don't see the sheriff. You're not surprised. You cross the last set of buildings and step back onto the trail, leading home, your arms full, your heart still slightly tight in your chest. You try to relax. The wind has picked up again. You pull your coat tighter. Town is necessary, but never comfortable. It's a place to go only when you must. A place to move through quietly. Because you never know who's angry today, or drunk, or both. You make it back to your cabin by early afternoon. The door creaks, the fire greets you weakly, and the silence wraps around your shoulders like a blanket made of ghosts. You put away your supplies. You place the shovel handle on the table. You sit for a moment. Then you stand again. Because the work isn't done. And town is behind you for now. Quirky detail. Some frontier towns required newcomers to check their weapons at the edge of town, like a coat check for danger. In places like Tombstone, Arizona, this ordinance was strictly enforced, and refusal to comply could get you fined, jailed, or worse. Ironically, one of the most famous gunfights in the West, the gunfight at the OK Corral, began because a group of men refused to surrender their guns inside town limits. Historians still argue whether the myth of the lawless Wild West was more media invention than reality. Some point to crime statistics and town ordinances that show relatively low murder rates. Others argue that the informal nature of justice, including lynch mobs and vigilante groups, points to a society that operated on fear and retaliation more than legal process. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in between. You take a sip of water. It tastes of iron and winter. You glance toward the stove. You check the windows. The town is quiet again, miles away, but you can still feel it. That itch between your shoulders, that prickle behind your ears, because you've been to town. And you made it back. This time. The sun is past its highest point now, but its warmth hasn't improved. It just stares down from above, like an impartial observer offering no comfort, casting shadows that feel longer than they should. You're back from town, still intact, still carrying your supplies, but the tension hasn't fully left your shoulders. That kind of caution lingers like smoke in wool. You didn't get into trouble, but that doesn't mean you weren't close. Out here, trouble is always an arm's length away, sometimes closer. You place the supplies on the table, dust trailing behind each bag as you set them down. The flour sack sighs, the tin labeled beef stew wobbles slightly. You nudge it into place like a soldier in formation. The shovel handle rests beside them like a crooked baton. It'll need fixing soon, but not now. Right now, there's the fence to check again, the firewood to stack higher, and if you can muster the energy, the outhouse door which blew off in last night's wind. But before that, maybe just a minute of rest. You sit. Your back cracks softly, almost appreciatively. You let your hands hang in your lap, the dirt under your nails catching the last bit of light filtering through the dusty window. You glance at the fire, still going, though it needs feeding soon. And then, from outside, a sound. Not sharp, not loud, just wrong. A hiccup in the usual silence. You rise slowly, instinct leading. You don't grab the rifle, but your eyes flick to it, just in case. You step out onto the porch. The wind carries nothing but dust. The whistle of dry grass brushing against itself, and there, a creak, wood on wood. From the direction of the saloon 2 miles west comes the faintest echo of voices raised not in song or cheer, but in that special tone that precedes something unpleasant. You can't hear words, just the pitch. And now you're remembering something you didn't want to remember. Because it's about 100 p.m. now. High noon, that time of day where legends are supposed to unfold right in the center of town, in the dust under the burning sun. A man with a mustache. A man with a grudge. They step out into the street. Hands twitch at holsters. The townsfolk hide. A tumbleweed rolls dramatically across the scene. You've seen it in movies, everyone has, but none of that's real. Because the Wild West didn't work that way. Nobody waited until noon. Nobody waited for a crowd. Nobody waited at all. Mainstream historical fact. Contrary to Hollywood depictions, quick-draw duels in the street were vanishingly rare. Most frontier violence happened impulsively during brawls, arguments, or ambushes. Many victims were shot in the back or through saloon windows. In fact, notable shootouts like the gunfight at the OK Corral were often misunderstandings or the result of brewing legal disputes, not stand-up duels between gentlemen with 6 shooters and clear consciences. You step back inside. You don't hear any more shouting. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe it was something that ended quickly, as these things tend to do. There's a tension in towns like these that simmers under the floorboards. Everyone's carrying something: old wounds, old debts, old bottles. Guns are worn as casually as hats. And if 2 people hate each other, they rarely wait until it's socially acceptable to settle it. You return to your work. The coop needs reinforcement again. Something's been pushing at the boards from underneath. You wedge a few rocks into the soft earth drive nails where you can and mutter apologies to the hens who seem unimpressed. Your hands are sore, knuckles raw. The hammer slips once and catches your thumb. You don't scream. You just shake it out and keep going. You know now that the movies got it wrong. The West wasn't cinematic. It wasn't grandiose or choreographed. It was petty, sudden, messy. It was a spilled drink, a sideways glance, a whispered accusation. It was a family argument that escalated too far, a gambler with a short fuse, a stranger with bad timing. Quirky detail. In some towns, bar fights were so common that saloons nailed heavy planks along the bottom of their walls like a sort of damage control baseboard to prevent boots from kicking through during scuffles. And in one infamous saloon in Leadville, Colorado, patrons carved tally marks into the bar to keep track of how many fights they'd won like twisted high scores. Bartenders kept loaded shotguns behind the counter, not for show, but for sweeping drunkards out the door, sometimes literally. You glance at the window again. The horizon looks calm. The wind has shifted. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks, once then stops. You remember reading that some towns banned firearms within city limits. That's true. Dodge City had signs. Tombstone required visitors to check their guns, but enforcement depended on who was in charge that day and how drunk they were. Some sheriffs were respectable. Others, not so much. You pick up the new shovel handle and set about replacing the old one. It's fiddly work, the kind that requires patience and fingers that haven't been split open by dry air. Still, it goes well enough. A few splinters later, the blade is secure again. You lean the shovel against the doorframe, satisfied. Another small thing done. Another moment won from the chaos. You take a sip of water. Lukewarm metallic. You stare at your reflection in the surface of the tin cup and realize you look older than you did this morning. Maybe only by a few hours. Maybe more. This life doesn't care how you feel about it. There are no pity breaks, no holidays. The best you can do is get through the day without something breaking your tools, your shelter, your spirit. Historians still argue whether the concept of the gunslinger was based on any real class of person, or simply an invention of dime novels and traveling Wild West shows. Figures like Billy the Kid and Wild Bill Hickok were real, but their stories were inflated by sensationalist newspapers and showmen looking to entertain Eastern audiences hungry for tales of danger and honor. Some say the West was never quite as wild as the stories suggest. Others insist that for certain unlucky souls, it was even worse. You check the fire again. It's steady now. The shadows inside the cabin are beginning to stretch across the walls, curling into corners like cats seeking warmth. You take a breath. The silence has returned, but it doesn't feel peaceful. It feels earned. Because you made it through town. You made it through the heat of the day. And you didn't get shot. Not bad for high noon. You glance again toward the horizon, where the sky has begun its slow tilt toward evening. You still have time to collect a few more logs. Maybe check the traps if the light holds. There's always one more task. Always. You glance toward the woods behind your cabin, just a thin fringe of trees this far out on the open prairie, but enough to hide a few wild things. The wind has shifted again. You notice it because the smoke from the chimney changes course, curling eastward like it's trying to escape. That usually means something. Weather, or something moving in the brush. And out here, either one is worth paying attention to. The day has slid past noon into the long, quiet stretch of afternoon. It's the part of the day modern people associate with second cups of coffee and quiet yawns. But here, it's when the real tests often begin. The body is tired, the sun starts sinking, and the world starts getting hungry, literally and figuratively. You grab the axe again, not for firewood this time. You need to clear a few branches near the coop that are bowing dangerously low. In the next windstorm, they'll snap and crush the fencing if you don't deal with them first. It's always something. The snow has melted just enough to reveal slick, half-frozen mud beneath, which means every step feels like it could be your last, if you're unlucky. You nearly lose your footing on the slope behind the barn, right where you told yourself to lay down some gravel 2 weeks ago. You make a mental note to do it tomorrow. You also made that note last Tuesday. You suspect you'll make it again. You hack at the first branch. The axe bites in with a satisfying thunk, then again and again. Wood chips fly. The tree groans, finally giving way with a reluctant crack and a downward lurch that snaps the air like a whip. It falls clean. You feel a flicker of pride. Then you turn to the next. That's when you hear it. A rustle. You freeze mid-swing breath, fogging in the cold. Another rustle, this time from the bushes near the pen. You squint, stepping carefully. There's a low growl. Not loud, but unmistakable. And there, half shrouded in bare branches and dead leaves, is a coyote. Its eyes glint. Its body is lean, too lean. Winter has been hard, and hunger makes even skittish creatures bold. You don't move, neither does it. The moment stretches long and thin. Then it turns. Slowly. Not in fear, but calculation. It melts back into the brush, quiet as snowfall. You let your breath out slowly. The animals are safe for now. But that won't last forever. Mainstream historical fact predators were a constant concern for frontier settlers. Wolves, coyotes, bobcats, and mountain lions prowled the edges of homesteads, particularly in winter when food was scarce. Livestock losses could devastate a family's ability to survive. Children were kept indoors after dark. Guns were kept loaded at the door, and still stories circulated about disappearing calves, missing hens, and occasionally more haunting tales of people who wandered too far from home. You finish clearing the branches with one eye always on the tree line. Then it's on to the next chore, checking the traps. You set them yesterday, just down by the creek. The air is colder here, damper, the kind that slips into your lungs and settles. You follow the narrow trail, little more than flattened grass, now half covered in crusty snow. The first trap is empty. The second has been sprung, but whatever was caught escaped or was taken. You see tracks. Small, clawed, probably a raccoon. The third holds a rabbit. You approach slowly. It's already gone quiet and still. You feel a mix of relief and guilt. This is food, necessary, but also a life. You thank it softly under your breath, even if you don't know why. It just feels right. You bring it back wrapped in burlap. It'll be dinner tonight, if you can muster the strength to prepare it. Back at the cabin, the wind is rising again. The sky has gone that strange shade of lead blue, heavy with something that might be snow, or just the threat of it. You check the barn doors, you secure the coop, you inspect the tool shed and wedge the broken latch with a stone. You bring in more wood for the fire. These are small things. But out here, small things undone become big problems very quickly. And then the cold begins to shift. You feel it in your teeth, in the tips of your fingers. The air carries that raw scent of something distant, ozone dust and pine. It's not just winter anymore. It's a storm. You hurry to cover the firewood pile with oilcloth. You secure the chicken coop door with an extra board. You close the shutters, such as they are just planks on hinges. You check the chimney vent. You stoke the fire. All of this because the wind is whispering louder now. Because if you don't prepare, you will not be comfortable. And out here, discomfort can kill. Quirky detail, some frontier families used rattlesnakes as a kind of organic alarm system, kept in jars near doorways or beneath floorboards in barns. Their sudden rattling could alert settlers to intruders or, more practically, rodent activity. It was a curious, dangerous practice. But on the frontier, even the wildlife sometimes joined the security team. You retreat inside, rubbing your hands together, the warmth from the fire slowly creeping into your bones. The rabbit sits on the table. You've plucked what you could outside. You'll gut and clean it now using the old tin basin, wiping your hands with a square of cloth that used to be a handkerchief and now serves as a multi-use rag. You work quietly. The knife is dull. You'll sharpen it tomorrow. Probably. You glance at the fire again. You're beginning to see that the real danger of frontier life isn't in the dramatic moments, the gunfights, the wolves, the blizzards. It's in the wear, the grind, the fact that everything you do costs something: time, effort, energy, attention. And if you let any of it slide, there's a price to be paid. Not always, immediately, but always, eventually. Historians still debate whether the sheer difficulty of frontier survival united people in resilience or simply wore them down. Letters from the period reveal both families leaning on one another in extraordinary ways, and individuals succumbing to mental fatigue, illness, and despair. The mythology tends to emphasize stoicism and grit, but the truth may be far more emotionally complex. You finish preparing the rabbit and place it in the pot with some beans and what's left of an onion that's trying very hard to become a new onion. The smell is good, not great, but comforting. You ladle water into the mix and hang the pot over the fire. Outside, the light has started to dim. Afternoon is bleeding into early dusk. You take a moment standing near the fire to stretch your back. Your arms feel like lead. Your eyes itch. There's a cut on your thumb that you forgot to notice until now. Your boots are still damp. Your stomach growls. But you've made it this far, through wildlife wind and wandering predators, through falling branches and frozen trails, through the long stretch of afternoon when the cold sharpens and the shadows lengthen. Dinner is simmering. The animals are safe. The door is bolted, and you're still standing, which in the Wild West qualifies as a pretty good day. The light outside dies with an almost deliberate slowness, as if the sun itself is reluctant to leave you alone out here. You stand at the window bowl, in your hands rabbit stew steaming softly into your face, and watch the last golden streaks sink below the edge of the hills. The sky is bruised purple, now turning black at the corners, and the wind has gone quiet, but not comfortingly so. It's the hush that settles before something moves, a stillness that says, "Listen carefully." You sit near the fire, spooning the stew carefully. It's not gourmet, not even close. The rabbit is tough in places, the beans a little gritty, and the broth thin as rainwater. But it's warm, and it's yours, and it fills a kind of hollow you didn't even notice growing during the day. You eat slowly, savoring each bite more for the effort it took than for the taste. When you're done, you rinse the bowl with the last bit of warmed water and hang the tin over the hearth to dry. There's no sink, no sponge, no lemon-scented soap, just ashes and heat. You wipe your hands on the same cloth from earlier, which now smells faintly of onions, iron, and smoke. Then, you prepare for the night. Because now comes the part that even the toughest frontiersmen didn't romanticize: the hours between sundown and sunrise, when the world forgets you exist, and then remembers just enough to test you. You check the door again, then the shutters, then the animals. The coop is quiet, the hens tucked in like tired pensioners. The barn creaks in the wind. You squint into the darkness and see nothing, but that means exactly nothing out here. You could be watched, or completely alone. You could be both. You return inside and sit near the fire, wrapping the rough wool blanket around your shoulders. There's no lamp, only a stub of a candle and the flickering flame. You listen. Wind across the roof. The occasional snap of firewood shifting. Somewhere, an owl calls out and gets no reply. This is the part no one talks about. The deep, pressing solitude. the kind that wraps around your chest and makes you breathe a little shallower. There are no buzzing electronics, no passing cars, no distant street lamps, just blackness, and the knowledge that the frontier night is not an empty stage, but a hidden theater full of creatures, both four-legged and two, that move when the world isn't watching. Mainstream historical fact. On the frontier, nighttime was often the most dangerous period. With no electric lighting pitch, darkness reigned outside, and inside too, if firewood or candles ran low. Bandit raids, horse theft, wild animal attacks, and even accidental shootings increased after dark. Many settlers slept lightly with a loaded firearm within reach. Crime statistics from the late 19th century in Western territories show that a significant portion of violent incidents occurred at night, often targeting isolated homes and travelers. You take your time banking the fire. Not too high, it'll burn out. Not too low, it'll go cold. You pile on one more log and watch it catch the orange light blooming like a cautious flower. You pull the rifle a little closer, not because you expect anything, just in case. And you lay down. Your bed is a straw-filled tick stuffed into a wooden frame. It's been restuffed twice this year, and still it crunches beneath you like old paper. You pull the blanket over your shoulders and tuck it beneath your legs. There's no pillow, just a rolled-up coat that smells vaguely of horse and pine. You close your eyes and try to fall asleep. But sleep is harder than it should be. Your mind is tired, but your body twitches at every noise. The wind tapping the window frame, the scratching of something near the wall, a far-off thud you can't quite place. You open your eyes again. The fire is still burning. You sigh. Quirky detail. It wasn't uncommon for settlers to sleep with loaded guns under their pillows or within arm's reach, sometimes leading to tragic accidents. In several documented cases, including one in 1883 in Nebraska, a man rolled over and accidentally discharged his revolver, shooting himself in the leg and eventually dying of infection. Some families tried to reduce risk by hanging their guns above the bed tied to string for quick access, creating an impromptu version of the modern-day panic button. You finally drift off, but your dreams are jagged, disjointed. You dream of wolves with eyes like candles of snow falling indoors, of your hands stained red from picking berries that melt into ash. You wake suddenly. It's still dark. The fire is low. Something woke you. You're not sure what. You lie perfectly still. Then a knock, just one. Not loud. You sit up, heart thrumming. Another knock, this time softer, like a tap. You rise slowly. The rifle's already in your hands. You approach the door. You don't call out. You don't open it. You wait. Then silence again. You stand there a long time, listening, every hair on your body reaching outward. Eventually, the cold convinces you to move. You slip the latch closed again, wedge the chair against the handle for good measure. Then you return to the hearth, adding another log. Your nerves take longer to calm than the fire does. You curl back beneath your blanket, eyes open, ears straining. Sleep will come. Eventually. Probably. Historians still debate whether settlers exaggerated nighttime dangers in their letters and journals as a way to impress relatives back east, or whether they were genuinely as afraid as their words suggest. Some argue that fear was a cultural tool used to bond communities and justify harsh vigilance. Others suggest that the solitude and genuine threats of frontier life simply created a permanent edge to every moment, day or night. Hours pass. The fire shrinks again. Your eyes flutter shut, and this time, they stay closed. Outside, the wind has picked up. A loose shutter bangs softly. A coyote yips somewhere far away. Inside, your breathing evens out. You dream again, but this time, of less terrible things: a tree you planted that grew overnight, a kettle that never ran dry, a barn full of kittens. The night is still long, but you've made it through its first hardest hours. And with luck and maybe a good door, you'll make it to morning. At some unknowable hour just before dawn, when your fire has died down to a warm breath, and the cold begins crawling up through the floor again, your mind slips into another layer of dream, not jagged this time, but strange. The sound of the wind fades. The straw mattress beneath your back softens into something else. The smells of soot rabbit and gun oil dissolve, and in their place comes clay and river mud, and the sharp, acrid scent of something both ancient and unclean. You're still lying on your back, but the ceiling above you has changed. It's now a series of palm-thatch beams darkened with centuries of smoke. And beyond them, the faint glow of an early Mesopotamian sunrise. Your body is no longer sore from chopping wood or shooing off coyotes. Now you ache in new ways, sore from squatting at the edge of an irrigation ditch all day, ankle deep in muck, clearing silt by hand because some upstream family dumped their kitchen scraps into the canal again. You sit up confused, then somehow understand this is the ancient city of Ur near the delta of the Euphrates sometime, around 2500 BCE. You've fallen asleep in one kind of historical hardship and awakened in another. The walls of your house are made of sun-baked clay bricks stacked by hand patched with straw and animal hair. They don't keep out much heat nor much noise, but they do trap smells, all of them, because the mighty Mesopotamian cities, the so-called cradles of civilization, were not exactly known for their sparkling cleanliness. The side streets are open sewers. Chamber pots are emptied directly into the alleyways, which means the warm morning sun is already coaxing some truly revolting vapors into the air. You cough lightly, wiping your nose on a scrap of linen. You glance toward the rear of your home. There, a large clay jar sits innocently in the corner. You recognize it. It's the laundry vat, and you already know what's in it. A pungent mix of water and human urine left to sit in the heat used to bleach your family's tunics white again. Because, in Ur, the ammonia in urine wasn't waste. It was detergent. Mainstream historical fact. The ancient Mesopotamians developed sophisticated irrigation systems and city planning concepts, including paved roads and central administrative buildings. But sanitation was rudimentary at best. Most homes lacked toilets, and waste was tossed into open drains or canals. The streets of cities like Ur and Babylon were notoriously filthy, and disease spread easily, particularly during the warmer months. Archaeologists have uncovered latrine areas and cesspits, but citywide sewer systems were centuries away. You step outside carefully, not wanting to splash into something regrettable. A pair of goats bleat lazily tied near the door. A child darts past carrying a broken clay tablet. In the distance, the ziggurat rises like a layer cake of sun-dried brick spiritual center, bureaucratic hub, and logistical nightmare all rolled into one. You pass through the market, baskets of grain, dates, flatbread, fish that's been drying in the sun for what must surely be too long. A man is yelling about copper weights being tampered with. A woman is selling charms to ward off the fever spirits. You keep walking, and that's when you realize something else. The city may be chaotic, but it's also alive, bustling, loud, multilingual. There are Sumerians, Akkadians, even a few traders from the Indus Valley. You can't understand everyone, but the gestures are familiar. Someone nods in your direction. Someone else offers a half-burnt fig. You decline. You're still thinking about that laundry vat. Quirky detail. The Babylonians, descendants of the Sumerians, were known to use urine not just for laundry, but also for medicinal purposes and even as a cleaning agent. Texts from the period reference its use in treating wounds and softening leather. Ammonia was useful, yes, but the side effects included skin burns, awful stench, and occasionally unfortunate infections. And yet, this was considered hygienic compared to doing nothing. Later that afternoon, the air grows hot. You retreat to a shaded awning made of reeds. Someone hands you a cup of barley beer. It's warm, flat, and cloudy, but surprisingly refreshing. You take a sip and stare at the sun as it tilts downward. Then, you notice something odd. People are flocking toward the canals not to bathe, but to scoop water for dinner. even children. You try not to think about the runoff from earlier. You suddenly feel ill. And yet, this too is part of the rhythm of ancient life. The people here may not have had antibiotics, but they had systems, rules, rituals, and they survived more or less. Long enough at least to give rise to empires. Historians still debate whether Mesopotamian urban hygiene was a calculated compromise in the face of early population growth, or simply the best possible outcome given their technological constraints. Some point to temple records that show attempts at regulated street cleaning and disease control, while others suggest that ancient sanitation efforts were largely reactive, more superstition than science. Night falls fast in Ur. You sit again on the hard clay floor, the firelight flickering on the wall. Children are being told stories. Old men are rubbing oil into their joints. Somewhere, someone sings a lullaby in a language lost to time. And as you drift again into the soft dark of sleep, the air thick with smoke and history, you feel the strangeness of it all. You've survived a night on the Wild West frontier. Now you've survived a day in one of the oldest cities in the world, and you're starting to sense a pattern. Comfort, you realize, has always been hard-earned. Cleanliness even more so. But life finds a way. And as you slip back into darkness, preparing for the next stop in this long, dusty dream of civilization, you wonder where and when you'll wake up next. You awaken not with a jolt, but with the slow, unbending stiffness of someone whose body has aged 5 years overnight. Gone is the clay floor of ancient Ur. Gone is the dry, acrid stink of sun-baked sewage. Now your body rests on a cold marble ledge beneath a vaulted ceiling that arches like a stone ribcage over your head. Light filters in through high windows, hazy pale and warm, and echoes with the sound of sandals on stone. You're in Rome now. And not the postcard-perfect Rome of Hollywood either. This is ancient Rome somewhere in the early 1st century CE, bustling with the noise of empire, but groaning under the weight of its own grandeur. You sit up, joints creaking, and realize you've been sleeping in what might have once been a bathhouse changing room. Though if the smell is any clue, it's currently being used more often as a latrine. You step into the street cautiously, avoiding puddles of unknown origin. The alley is narrow, boxed in by tall tenement buildings, insulae they're called, that lean toward each other as if whispering secrets. Between the upper floors, neighbors shout and pass baskets of food across rickety clotheslines. A woman dumps a pot of water, hopefully water, into the gutter below, and you barely dodge it. The noise is staggering. Carts rattle, vendors bark, stray dogs bark louder. Somewhere nearby, a fight is breaking out over a misweighed bag of flour. Rome, in all its imperial might, is alive and deeply, pungently filthy. Mainstream historical fact. Despite its architectural marvels and impressive aqueduct systems, ancient Rome streets were often teeming with waste. While the wealthy enjoyed private toilets and indoor plumbing, the majority of citizens used shared latrines or chamber pots. Waste was thrown into street gutters or public cesspits, which overflowed frequently. Combined with a dense population, some estimates place Rome's peak population at over 1 million. The result was a city with persistent sanitation issues, especially in the poorer districts. You follow the flow of foot traffic to the public latrine, curious now, though your stomach is already protesting. The building is low, squat, and bustling with activity, yes, bustling. Public toilets in Rome were social spaces where people caught up on gossip while doing their business. You step inside and immediately regret it. Stone benches line the walls, evenly spaced with keyhole-shaped openings. Beneath them, a shallow gutter of flowing water trickles by, meant to carry waste away. There is no privacy. There are no dividers. Just a row of Romans perched like birds, chatting casually about gladiator matches, grain prices, and which senator's son got caught sneaking out of the Vestal Virgin's temple. You don't sit. You back out slowly. And you're not the only one. You hear someone mutter about the smell, and someone else joke about the rats. A rat. You glance toward the gutter. Yes, definitely a rat. Moving quickly now, you find yourself in the forum where marble columns rise like pale trees, and statues of stern-faced men gaze down with eternal judgment. Here the city tries to be clean, swept, ordered. But even here, the scent of humanity clings to the corners. A slave boy pushes past carrying a bucket. The water sloshes red. You don't ask why. Quirky detail. The Romans used a communal cleaning tool in their public toilets, a sponge on a stick known as a tersorium, kept in a bucket of vinegar or brine. Patrons would share it, passing it down the row after use. There are records of people contracting infections, unsurprisingly, though no one dared complain too loudly, lest they be accused of weakness. Wealthier citizens often brought their own cleaning cloths, or their own personal slaves to attend to hygiene. As midday heat rolls in, the city begins to shimmer with sweat. You duck into a shaded taberna hoping for relief. The tavern is dim smoky and filled with the scent of grilled onions and cheap fish sauce. You order a cup of wine. It's watery and sour. The food cold lentils, dried olives, a crust of bread is better than expected. You watch as two men nearby argue about a debt. Another gestures wildly about taxes. The language flows around you like water over stones, Latin and Greek clipped and rhythmic. You understand just enough to know no one's happy about the new tariffs on olive oil. The bartender wipes his hands on a greasy cloth. You from Etruria, he asks, half joking. You shrug. It's safer than explaining you're from Kansas. Outside, the sun has begun to tilt. Children play with wooden hoops, racing through alleys. A woman sells perfume from a cart, though the scent is overwhelmed by the smell of a nearby fishmonger. A priest leads a small procession, scattering flower petals that immediately stick to the grime-covered stones. As you walk, you pass by a grand Roman villa with fountains gurgling behind marble walls. Inside, wealthy patricians dine on dormice stuffed with nuts and honey, their slaves fanning them lazily with palm fronds. You, however, are escorted firmly away from the entrance. Historians still debate the extent to which cleanliness was tied to class in ancient Rome. Some argue that hygiene practices were surprisingly democratic, with public baths and toilets open to all. Others suggest that true comfort, private baths, clean water, safe food was a luxury reserved for the elite, and that Rome's shared systems often failed the people who relied on them most. Night falls quickly over the 7 hills. The torches are lit flickering against mosaicked walls. You find shelter in a small upper-floor room in an insula accessed by a crooked wooden staircase that creaks beneath your weight. Inside is a single mat, a jug of water, and a view of rooftops stretching into the dark. You sit at the window. You think of the Wild West, of the howling wind, of the wolves, and of the silence. Rome is louder, smellier, more crowded, but also strangely comforting in its rhythms. The chaos has a pattern. The grime has a name. You lie down and close your eyes, and sleep comes again. Another dream, another time, another place. And you're starting to realize, no matter where, no matter when, 24 hours is a very long time. You awaken in darkness. Not the hush of a prairie night, nor the shadowed hush of a Roman tenement, but the dense, humid gloom of narrow medieval streets, where the air itself seems steeped in wood smoke and rot. A faint chime echoes in the distance, high and metallic, the kind of sound that might be coming from a monastery, bell tower, or a street vendor's iron ladle. You blink. A low wooden ceiling hovers just above your head, blackened with soot and sagging with the weight of years. You're in Paris, but not the one with pastries and cafes. This is Paris in the 13th century, a patchwork of timber buildings and open ditches where waste runs down the center of the cobbled lanes, and the concept of fresh air is at best wishful thinking. You sit up slowly on your straw-stuffed mattress, which is little more than a wooden platform covered in something that might once have been linen. The smell is unmistakable chamber pot, damp wool, old garlic, and the persistent tang of tallow. Your nose wrinkles before your eyes, fully open. Outside, the city stirs. You hear footsteps, cartwheels on stone, someone coughing wetly, dogs barking. Somewhere, someone is singing a hymn in a cracked voice. You pull a thin cloak over your shoulders, still stiff from the chill, and make your way toward the crooked door. And just in time. Because, with no warning at all, a splash of something definitely not water comes sailing from the window above you. You jump back instinctively, heart-pounding. A woman's voice yells, "Guard low," the customary warning shouted moments before emptying chamber pots onto the unsuspecting streets below. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval Paris, there were no modern sewage systems. Human waste kitchen refuse and animal remains were routinely thrown into the streets, where they collected in gutters and flowed slowly into the Seine. Garde à l'eau, literally, watch out for the water, became a necessary shout to warn passers-by before waste was dumped from upper-story windows. The stench was legendary, particularly in warmer months, and public health suffered accordingly. You sidestep the puddle and begin walking down Rue des Lombards, careful not to slip. Around you, the city unfolds like a medieval tapestry in motion. Cloth merchants shout over bolts of wool. Bakers stoke ovens. Rats dart between piles of cabbage leaves. You pass a man pulling a sled full of pig carcasses, their noses brushing the ground, leaving a trail of blood on the stones. It's morning in Paris, and it's absolutely repulsive. You duck into a nearby church to catch your breath. Inside, it's cooler. Incense burns in tall brass holders, the smoke curling like ribbon through shafts of colored light. A monk mutters something in Latin as he sweeps. You nod in his direction. He nods back, not stopping. Even here, the smell lingers damp stone, old wax, and the faint rot of bodies interred below the flagstones. You don't stay long. The smell of sanctity isn't quite enough to mask the rot of the world beyond. As the day warms, the narrow streets grow more crowded. You pass a bathhouse, a rarity. Public bathhouses are allowed, though frowned upon by some clergy. Too much nudity, they argue, invites sin. And indeed, as you pass the steaming doorway, you see both men and women lounging in shared tubs, gossiping beneath carved wooden arches. You also notice a sign tacked to the door, "Closed Mondays." For scouring lice, you walk a little faster. Quirky detail, due to the city's unsanitary conditions, lice and fleas were rampant. People often wore sachets of herbs or spices around their necks, pomanders, to mask the smell of their surroundings, and they hoped to protect against disease. Perfumed gloves and scented waxed mustaches were popular among the wealthy for the same reason. However, these olfactory defenses did little to combat the reality of rotting trash animal dung and human waste that filled the city's air. You stop at a food stall for lunch, a wedge of hard cheese, stale rye bread, a few sour apples. You chew slowly seated on a half-barrel outside a tavern. A boy walks by barefoot, whistling through missing teeth. He's followed by a goose. You're not sure which of them looks more confident. You continue your wanderings past blacksmiths, coopers, scribes, and one man who seems to be selling teeth, some human, some not. The population density is staggering. People live on top of each other, sometimes 10 or 15 to a room. Whole families share single beds, and most don't bathe more than once or twice a year. Evening brings a faint breeze carrying the scent of firewood and roast meat. You follow your nose to a market where a pig is being roasted whole. The meat is charred on the outside and questionably pink inside. You pass, but the dog beside the spit gets lucky. You turn toward the Seine, hoping for fresher air. Instead, you're greeted by the sight of a boatman tipping barrels into the river. They slosh thickly. Not fish, waste. The river, once a source of water, is now a floating landfill. Women still wash clothes in its current, hoping the movement carries away the filth. Children swim downstream, oblivious to the hazards. Historians still argue whether medieval Parisians truly understood the link between sanitation and disease. Some suggest they had an intuitive sense of contamination, as evidenced by laws forbidding certain trades from operating upstream of public fountains. Others argue that medical knowledge was so rudimentary, still rooted in the theory of humors and miasmas, that even the most obvious connections were lost in theological or astrological explanations. You find a spot to rest. A wooden bench beside a stone wall. You pull your cloak tight as the night air settles in. Lanterns flicker. Somewhere, a minstrel plays a single-stringed instrument. Someone laughs loud and full of wine. Somewhere else, someone weeps quietly in the dark. You look up at the moon. It's the same moon that watched you sleep in the Wild West. The same one that rose over Babylon. The same one that now lights your path through this dense, dirty living maze of a city. And, for all its filth, Paris has a strange kind of charm. There's music, movement, and the resilience of people who've never known anything else. They live, love, suffer, and thrive amid the grime. And tomorrow, you'll wake somewhere else. And you'll do it all again. When you open your eyes this time, the world smells different. Not foul exactly, but unfamiliar in a way that makes your nose twitch and your brain immediately alert. There's no manure in the air, no chamber pots swinging overhead, no open sewers gurgling with last night's stew. Instead, the scent is delicate charcoal, plum blossom, cooked rice, and something else. Wood smoke, yes, but sharper, thinner. You blink again and realize you're indoors, but the walls are made of shoji paper stretched over thin wooden frames. Light filters through them like honey. Welcome to Edo Japan sometime around the late 18th century in the waning decades of the Tokugawa shogunate. The room is bare quiet and oddly calming. A futon rests on the tatami floor beneath you, and the only furniture is a wooden chest, a lacquered basin, and a painted screen depicting cherry blossoms in a spring breeze. It should feel peaceful, but you're already sweating, because the air is hot. Not just summer hot, stifling. Outside the paper walls, a city wakes with a noise entirely unlike the medieval clangor of Paris. Here, it's softer, more rhythm than racket. The shuffle of Gaeta sandals, the murmur of merchants, a faint chant from a Buddhist temple bell, and beneath it all, the ever-present thread of flame. You step outside, and that's when it hits you. The houses are close, unnaturally close. Wood touching wood rooftops, almost kissing. A single careless ember, and the entire district could vanish in hours. Mainstream historical fact, Edo, the city now known as Tokyo, was one of the most densely populated wooden cities in human history. Fires were so frequent and devastating that they were nicknamed Edo no Hana, the flowers of Edo. Between 1600 and 1868, over 100 major fires swept through the city, often leaving tens of thousands homeless. Whole neighborhoods were designed to burn and be rebuilt quickly, and fire brigades were part of daily urban life. And today, it's already fire season. You move quickly along a canal-side street, watching workers haul buckets of water to rooftop cisterns. Most buildings are made of sugi Japanese cedar, dry as paper. The wind picks up, lifting your sleeves, stirring the dust. Suddenly, a shout, "Hi, no Yujin! Beware of fire, you freeze!" The chant is passed along the street like a wave. But it's only a drill. The real danger everyone knows comes at night. As you walk, you pass Kura fireproof storehouses built from clay and stone, blackened and windowless. A sign of wealth and caution. Most people can't afford them. The average home is a flimsy wooden structure, one spark away from destruction. You stop at a stall selling skewers of grilled eel. The scent is mouthwatering. You haven't eaten since the cheese and sour bread in Paris. You buy one with a few small mon coins left in your sleeve pocket. Where did those come from, you wonder, but don't question it. You're too hungry. The vendor smiles, teeth blackened with dye, an old custom meant to signal marriage and refinement. He hands you the skewer with practiced grace. "Where are you from?" he asks politely, eyes narrowing at your strange accent. You fumble for an answer. Kansai, you say. Safe enough. He nods. Quirky detail. In Edo Japan, blackened teeth, ohaguro, were a sign of elegance and marital status for women, and sometimes men of the court. The dye, made from iron filings, vinegar, and tea powder, was thought to protect the teeth from decay and was considered beautiful. Travelers often found the look shocking or eerie, especially when accompanied by the pale faces and red lips favored by the time. You walk toward the Yoshiwara, the walled-off red light district, not out of vice, but curiosity. The streets are crowded with samurai merchants and actors in heavy makeup, their sandals clacking on the wooden planks. Music drifts from behind screens, shamisen strings clapping laughter. Paper lanterns bob in the wind. It's beautiful, strangely theatrical. And yet, there's an undercurrent of sadness. You pass a brothel entrance where women painted and dressed in silks peer out through wooden slats like birds in a cage. You realize how much of Edo's surface beauty conceals deeper hardship. Outside the district, life is less adorned. You watch a kitchen maid boiling rice in a communal pot while fanning the fire with a foot-operated bellows. Ash floats into the air. A child nearby uses a leaf fan to swat at the embers. You can't help thinking this is how it starts. Historians still debate whether Edo's frequent fires were entirely accidental, or if they were sometimes used as a tool, deliberate burning to clear land-reset neighborhoods, or even as acts of revenge. Some argue that the city's officials were complacent, relying too heavily on its unique ability to rebuild quickly. Others insist that despite the risks, Edo's urban planners did everything they could given the materials and climate, and that fire was simply part of life. You pass a fire watchtower manned by a lone figure holding a conch shell trumpet and a long bamboo spear. His job is to spot smoke, ring the alarm, and call the Haikushi Edo's fearsome fire brigades. These groups, made up mostly of lower-class laborers, wore thick coats soaked in water, carried long hooks, and were trained to tear down houses to stop fires from spreading. You imagine the chaos sirens of drums, the rush of sandals, the heat, the smoke, and then nothing left but ash. As dusk settles, a wind picks up. You clutch your borrowed yukata tighter. The paper lanterns sway. A nearby hearth crackles as a mother boils sweet potatoes for her children. You wonder if tonight will be one of the nights the flowers of Edo bloom again. You return to your guest room, perhaps a ryokan, though the sleeping mat is hard, and the tea served lukewarm. Outside your paper wall, cicadas trill. You stare at the candle flickering in its wooden holder and imagine it tipping over. And you wonder again how anyone made it to morning. But they did. They lived, loved, rebuilt, painted their teeth black, and wore embroidered kimonos to the theater. They composed poetry about the moon and death and the sound of sandals in the rain. They survived. And you somehow have survived another day. Where will you wake up next? The world is vast, and so very, very fragile. You awaken this time to warmth not from a rising sun or a distant fire, but from stone, smooth, radiant, and scented faintly with citrus and burning herbs. You're lying on a platform of polished marble, your skin damp from the condensation of heat and steam. Around you echoes the low murmur of voices bouncing off vaulted ceilings, water trickling into a basin, and the distant ring of metal on tile. You are in an Ottoman hammam, a public bathhouse in Istanbul, sometime during the height of the Ottoman Empire, perhaps the 17th century, though time has grown soft around the edges now. The walls are carved with arabesques and tulips, their colors soft but precise, and light filters through tiny stained glass apertures like stars scattered across the ceiling. For a moment, you lie still, entranced by the sensory softness of it all. After the ash-filled night in Edo and the ankle-deep gutters of medieval Paris, this place feels like paradise, humid, warm, elegant. Surely, this must be the cleanest you've felt across all your dreamlike leaps through time. But as always, there's a catch. You rise slowly, limbs heavy from the heat. Water clings to your skin like silk. A man approaches wearing a pestimol, a thin towel wrapped around the waist, and carrying a bowl of warm water, and a coarse glove. He speaks softly in Turkish, gesturing for you to lie down again. You do. What follows is a full-body exfoliation, the likes of which you have never experienced. The glove made of raw silk or goat hair scrapes away layers of dead skin with what feels like sandpaper and good intentions. You grit your teeth as he scrubs your arms, back, legs, everywhere. He dumps water over you again and again, the heat loosening your muscles even as your nerves buzz. Mainstream historical fact Ottoman bathhouses known as hammams were central to both hygiene and social life in the empire. Modeled after Roman baths, but infused with Islamic architectural elegance, they provided not just cleanliness, but community. Men and women bathed separately or in entirely separate buildings, and regular attendance was encouraged as both a religious and civic virtue. Bathing was seen as purifying for the body and soul, especially before prayer or major life events. But as your skin begins to glow pink from the relentless scrubbing, you begin to notice a few things that suggest this marble-scented paradise isn't quite as perfect as it looks. First, the smell. Though masked by steam and lemon oils, there's an undercurrent of something more organic. Sweat. Mold. Something metallic, faint and sweet. Second, the water. It's reused, recycled, warmed again, poured again. The bathhouses are popular, yes, but plumbing even here is rudimentary at best. There is no constant influx of fresh filtered water. The steam that envelops you also envelops dozens of others each day. Third, the whispers. A woman across the room, this bathhouse must have different rules, leans close to another and murmurs something. They laugh. You realize then that gossip flows through the hammam like steam through its vents. Every scandal, affair, pregnancy, and insult is carried, rinsed, and aired again. Clean bodies, perhaps, but rarely clean reputations. As you sit near the edge of the sokluk, the cool-down room, you sip on a small cup of sherbet, a sweet, chilled drink made with fruits and herbs. Your body aches in a good way, but your eyes drift to the corners of the bathhouse, where the tiles are chipped. The mold creeps, and the heat collects into pockets of suffocating closeness. You're not alone. There's a woman to your left, her expression dreamy and pale. But there's tension in her jaw. You recognize it, the weariness of someone who's not here by choice. Maybe she's a servant. Maybe worse. Some women in hammams weren't just visitors. Some worked here. Some didn't get to leave. Quirky detail. There are whispered accounts, especially from Western travelers, and Ottoman gossip of bathhouses being used for more than just bathing. While the majority were respectable, some were also spaces of seduction, political intrigue, and occasionally abduction. Stories circulated of women being kidnapped from the streets and sold into domestic or sexual servitude under the cover of the steam. While these tales are difficult to verify, they added to the exotic and dangerous reputation of the hammam in European imaginations. You leave the warmth, reluctantly stepping into a side room where attendants offer scented oils and combs. You choose a mild rose essence and run the comb through your damp hair, gazing into a small, polished brass mirror. Your face is pink, cheeks flushed, and yet somehow you still feel slightly grimy. Perhaps it's just the knowledge that everything in the hammam, including its elegance, is shared, recycled, and repurposed. As you walk through the arches and back into the streets of Istanbul, the world greets you with a very different kind of chaos. The smell of sweat is replaced by roasted lamb. The quiet hush of marble halls becomes the shout of spice merchants and camel bells. You follow a narrow alley into the covered market, a vast woven canopy of stalls and wares. Silks, glass lamps, rugs, swords, spices, and baklava. The grandeur is overwhelming, but there's no air. It's hot, chokingly so, and despite being freshly bathed, you're sweating again. It clings, and soon your robe sticks to your skin once more. You pass by a fountain where a mother washes her child. The water is brown. She rinses a cloth in it and wipes the child's face gently, lovingly. A fruit seller nearby slices open a melon, its juice dripping down his forearms. You realize suddenly that the hammam was not an escape from the city's grime, but simply a pause in it. Historians still argue about the true purpose of hammams. Were they genuinely centers of hygiene, or were they primarily social institutions masked as such? Some claim that weekly attendance did little to improve health given the quality of water and ventilation. Others argue that the rituals of scrubbing and sweating reduced illness and created a rare egalitarian space in Ottoman society where even women could share newsform alliances and control elements of their own narrative. By nightfall, your skin has cooled, but your senses haven't. You find yourself seated at a small table near the Bosphorus, sipping weak tea from a tulip-shaped glass. A soft breeze blows in from the strait. The stars are bright overhead. You close your eyes, remembering the warmth of marble, the sting of the scrub, the sting of half-heard stories whispered through steam. Your hands are clean, your body refreshed, but your mind still tangled. Because, as with every era you've visited, comfort is a mask beautiful, intricate, and thin. Behind the luxury, there's heat, danger, power, and the quiet, undying tension between appearance and reality. You lean back and exhale. Perhaps the greatest cleanse in history wasn't about water or oils at all, but about survival and the will to find moments of peace, even in places built to contain whispers. Your eyes open slowly to a different sort of haze. Not steam this time, but smoke. Heavy, acrid, unrelenting. The kind that clings to your clothes, seeps into your lungs, and leaves a sour film on your tongue. You are no longer near a marble basin or under the glow of colored glass. You are in a city thick with fog, but not the gentle river mist of early morning. This fog has edges grit and a color somewhere between yellow and gray. You've arrived in Victorian London in the midst of its industrial bloom. The year is somewhere in the 1850s, though the sky offers no help in determining the time. It is always gray here sometimes, from clouds, more often from coal smoke. You're walking now, boots scuffing through muddy streets slick with soot and horse droppings. Your nose itches. Your eyes water. A passing carriage wheels too close and splashes you with something that is definitely not just water. A boy shouts, "Oi, watch it," from the curb. Somewhere, a woman coughs a long, racking, lung-emptying cough, and no one turns to help. This is the Great Stink. Yes, that's the historical name. Mainstream historical fact. In the summer of 1858, the River Thames became so polluted with raw sewage industrial waste and rotting organic matter that the stench overwhelmed London. Parliament had to suspend sessions because of the unbearable smell. This crisis finally forced the government to invest in a modern sewer system designed by Joseph Bazalgette, which became one of the greatest engineering achievements of the Victorian era. You breathe shallowly, trying to minimize exposure, but it hardly helps. The filth isn't just in the river, it's in the air. The water pumps the unwashed faces of hurried strangers. Children run barefoot through puddles. Their feet are black with grime. A fishmonger dumps a bucket of fish guts into a gutter already overflowing with refuse. Dogs rummage through it. So do rats. You spot a sign, "Lodgings 2 pence a night." Inside the doorway, a woman with one eye and a half-toothless grin gestures for you to come in. You decline. You've seen enough straw mattresses for one lifetime. Instead, you walk toward the heart of the city, where tall buildings loom in narrow alleys, creating wind tunnels that smell like wet chimney smoke. The streets are loud cobblestones, echoing with hooves, factory bells, barkers shouting about hair tonic and patent corsets. But louder still is the constant undercurrent of coughing. London is coughing. All of it. You duck into a pub more for warmth than companionship. Inside, it's dark and humid, lit by gas lamps that hiss and flicker. The patrons are mostly men's sleeves rolled up, eyes red. You order a beer. It arrives warm and flat. The barkeep wipes his nose on his sleeve before pouring it. You stare at the glass and decide to hold it for appearance only. At a nearby table, two women gossip in hushed tones. One is wearing rouge made from cochineal and dried snake's blood, a common Victorian cosmetic. It gives her cheeks a haunted flush, more corpse than coquette. The other woman dabs her lips with a red tint that smells like rust. It's unsettling, yet fashionable. Quirky detail. Some Victorian women used unusual and sometimes dangerous substances in their makeup. One recipe for lipstick involved dried snake's blood, believed to provide both color and a tingle. Others used lead-based white face powder that slowly poisoned them over time. In a city obsessed with pale skin and ruby lips, the pursuit of beauty was often deadly. You exit the pub and wander toward the East End. Here, the misery intensifies. Rows of tenement houses lean on each other like drunks. Laundry hangs like flags of surrender between windows. The air smells of boiled cabbage urine and despair. You pass a rag-and-bone man pulling a cart. He's collecting old shoes, bits of scrap metal, and occasionally dead animals. Children peer out from alleyways with hollow eyes. Some cough. Some scratch. One girl, maybe 5, offers to sell you matches. Another sleeps in a doorway, a burlap sack, her only blanket. You do not wake her. You reach a pump, hoping to rinse your hands. But a sign warns, do not drink cholera risk. You've read about this in modern history books, but it doesn't feel like history. It feels real, filthy, alive. And it makes you wonder, how did anyone survive? Historians still debate whether Victorian London was truly worse than other historical cities, or if it simply left better records of its misery. Diaries, medical logs, court transcripts, and newspaper accounts offer an intimate portrait of a society simultaneously progressing and collapsing. Some scholars argue that the filth forced innovation, pushing advancements in public health and civil engineering. Others claim it was preventable all along. Your path takes you past a small apothecary. Inside, you see glass bottles labeled laudanum, arsenic, and soothing syrup. You recall that soothing syrup often contained morphine and alcohol and was given to teething infants. You do not go inside. Instead, you continue through winding lanes, reaching the outskirts of a grander part of the city. Gaslight flickers from wrought iron lamps. A policeman walks past with a truncheon and a whistle. You wonder if he's watching for pickpockets or just trying to look busy. Somewhere a bell tolls. You pass a woman wrapped in too many shawls. She stumbles. You steady her. She smells of mothballs and misery. "Where are you from, love?" she asks, eyes watery. You hesitate. What could you possibly say? She nods, sensing your silence. "Ain't from here. Ain't from nowhere then. Good for you." And then she shuffles away. Night deepens. The smoke thickens. You feel it settle in your chest. Your skin itches. Your eyes sting. You sit on a low stone wall, exhausted. Across the street, a boy is writing something on a slate by lamplight. He pauses, frowns, erases. Tries again. You watch him, wondering what story he's trying to tell, what memory he's trying to save. Your own memory of London is already starting to blur, mottled with fog and gaslight, stained with coal dust and red snake blood lipstick. You close your eyes, and as sleep begins to take you again, you whisper a silent wish that when you wake, it will be to clean air, quiet streets, and light that comes from the sun, not from fire. Because you've seen enough cities built on smoke. And you're ready now for something else. You awaken to the thin rattle of a window shutter, barely hanging onto its rusted hinge, tapping out a slow, syncopated rhythm in the early morning wind. There's a strip of light cutting through the slats in your wall dust, swirling in it, golden and soft like flecks of wheat in water. The wood groans as you shift your weight, your spine crackling in protest from the unkind surface of your straw mattress. It takes a moment to remember where you are. Not in a proper bed. Not in a proper house. Not even in a proper century. You're back in the Wild West. The dream of Victorian smog and Ottoman steam has faded, leaving behind only a kind of abstract tiredness. But the fatigue in your muscles is real. You feel it as you swing your legs over the edge of your bunk, pressing calloused feet onto the cold, dusty floor. Outside, the prairie begins to wake. A rooster crows in the distance, dogs bark at shadows, and the slow clatter of hooves signals someone already beginning their day's ride. It's barely 5:30 a.m., and already the world is working. And so are you. There's no room for hesitation here. You lace up your boots, still stuffed with last night's hay, to fend off the cold and make your way outside. The wind cuts through your layers. You wrap your arms around yourself, but the chill is bone deep. A pot of water left out overnight has a thin layer of ice crusting the top. You break it with your knuckles and splash a little on your face. It stings. You're awake now. The tasks of the day unspool before you like a fraying rope. Feed the animals, patch the fence that last night's storm tore apart, haul water, chop kindling, check the trap line, and maybe if there's time, eat something. Breakfast is a limp chunk of salt pork and a few cold beans. You chew slowly, each bite a negotiation. You tell yourself it's fuel. Your body disagrees. As you move through your morning shoulders aching, you notice how your senses have sharpened. Every creak in the brush catches your attention. Every crow's caw overhead feels like a signal. You are constantly alert. Not in fear exactly, but in a sort of ongoing negotiation with your environment. You cannot afford to be distracted. Not here. You pass your neighbor's homestead, or what's left of it. A burned-out shell blackened timbers like ribs protruding from the earth. No one speaks about what happened. Some say bandits. Some say fire. Others hint at a deeper sadness. His wife hadn't been seen in weeks. Neither had the children. In the Wild West, misfortune doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it creeps in on soft feet unnoticed until the damage is done. And yet, people remain. The West, for all its hardship, holds a strange magnetism. Maybe it's the vastness. The sky so wide it makes your heart ache. Or the silence between the howls of the coyotes. Or perhaps the promise that this place, brutal as it is, could be made into something more. Something livable, beautiful even. You think back to the Mesopotamian marshes, the Roman sewers, the winding alleys of medieval Paris thick with stench and superstition, the glittering yet flammable world of Edo Japan, the snake-blood lipstick of London's underbelly. You've wandered through them all like a reluctant time traveler on foot, collecting not souvenirs, but scars. Each place clung to life in its own messy, magnificent way. Every civilization a balancing act between brilliance and brutality. And now here you are, brushing snow off your shoulders while attempting to reassemble a chicken coop with frozen fingers. There's something comforting in the continuity of it all. People survive. They adapt. They make do with whatever the era gives them, salt pork sewer rats or soot-colored skies. You return to your cabin around midday. Inside, it's marginally warmer, but not by much. The hearth flickers weakly. You crouch near it, extending your hands. The flames lick your palms gently, reminding you of their power, both life-giving and dangerous. A poorly built fire could burn your whole home down. Yet without it, you'd freeze. Outside, a wagon rolls by. The man at the reins lifts 2 fingers in greeting. You nod. This is the extent of socializing for most. Conversations are luxuries. You don't talk unless there's a reason. Words are saved like sugar and bullets. You find yourself sitting with a letter you'll never send. No post today, no post yesterday either. You scribble a few lines anyway, notes to no one addressed perhaps to yourself in another life. A small gesture of humanity. And then the sun begins to dip again. Another day evaporates in wind and dust. You make dinner, if you can call it that. A thin stew made from scraps thickened with flour and silence. You eat slowly, savoring the heat more than the taste. When it's gone, you scrape the bowl clean with a bit of bread crust and save the water for tomorrow's wash. Night comes quickly on the prairie. Without street lamps or neon, the dark reclaims everything. The only light now is the soft glow of your fire and the flickering stars above. You step outside and look up. It's a vast canvas, deeper and darker than you remember. The constellations are the same, though they've been with you since Ur in Rome and Edo and London. The stars don't change, just the people who stare at them. And in this stillness, something settles in your chest, not fear, not loneliness, but a kind of awe. You've walked through centuries of hardship, through filth and fire. You've seen how fragile and stubborn life can be. And somehow, despite it all, you're still standing. It makes you think maybe our modern luxuries aren't signs of weakness, but of triumph. Maybe your morning coffee, your soft mattress, your filtered water, and hot showers, and temperature-controlled rooms are not indulgences, but evidence that the past wasn't in vain, that someone somewhere survived long enough to make the world a little easier for those who came after. The people of the past weren't stronger than you. They were simply required to endure more, out of necessity, out of hope, out of sheer stubbornness. And you carry them with you, in your laughter, in your plumbing, in your bedtime stories told through glowing screens instead of glowing embers. Tonight, as you curl under blankets made of cotton instead of hay, with no revolver under your pillow and no frost in your breath, remember this: the Wild West was never just about cowboys and shootouts. It was about surviving 24 hours in a world where everything from the weather to your neighbor could turn on you. And still, people sang lullabies to their children. Still, they danced. Still, they hoped. Because even then, they dreamed of mornings like yours. And now, as the fire fades and the stars blink their slow ancient light, you can finally close your eyes. You've earned your rest, traveler. Your journey through time is done. Just listen to the wind soft now like a lullaby through the tall grass. You're home. Let yourself settle. Breathe slower now as the sounds of the Wild West fall behind you. The coyotes in the distance are quiet now, the wind no longer biting, but brushing. You are no longer in a sod house or beneath a canvas tent. You're wherever you are now, warm, safe, and still. Your body remembers the ache of hauling water and the weight of wool blankets. But your present self, you lie still, comfortable. The mattress beneath you has no bed bugs. The air carries no scent of dung or smoke. No one will knock on your door demanding your rifle or your food. The people who came before you lived hard lives, not because they were braver, but because they had to. They dreamed silently and stubbornly of the very peace you now hold in your hands. And through their sweat and their dust and their desperate courage, they made space for the world you live in today. So as your breathing slows and your thoughts become soft, let gratitude fold gently around you. Not loudly, not grandly, just a quiet thank you whispered into the darkness. Close your eyes. Let the night take you. You're not in the Wild West anymore. You're in the quiet now. And sleep is coming.